Okay, dear friends, a lot to discuss tonight, and I'm going to take you on a extreme journey together with our patriarch Yaakov Avinu with Jacob, and this journey is going to take us from heaven to earth and back again. So let's do that together. And the title of the parasha, which is the first of 6 Torah portions that are going to describe the life of Yaakov, Jacob, our forefather, is called Vayetze. Vayetze literally means to go out. And it's the first word of the parasha, and we'll see why that word tells us so much more than just a physical, geographical journey. And the parasha tells us, Vayetze Yaakov. Yaakov left Beersheva, which is in the south of Israel, Vayelech Harana, and he went to Harana. You can say to go to a place in two ways. One is you can say, for example, go to Mitzrayim, lo Mitzrayim, or Mitzrayim. Okay, both mean to go to that place. Here he goes from Beersheva and he goes to a place called Haran. Haran should sound familiar because it's where his father met his mother, and it's where his grandfather had left in order to make his way to the land of Israel. More about that in a moment. First of all, if he's going to Haran and he left there, why does it have to tell us that Yaakov left Beersheva? Obviously, he left Beersheva if he's going to Haran. Why the double expression of Vayetze and Vayelech? So the commentators jump on this one, including Rashi, and they say something fascinating. They say Vayetze Yaakov is more than just a geographical relocation. It means that when Jacob left Beersheva, Beersheva was not the same place. You see, there is a physical movement a person can take, but when you leave somewhere, your absence should be evident. And that's exactly what happened to Yaakov. He left Beersheva, and the Torah tells us he left Beersheva to go to Haran, although we already knew he was in Beersheva, to tell us that Beersheva was not the same after he left. Because when a righteous person, or any person who aspires to be righteous in behavior, and they leave a location, that location should be the same. There should be something missing. There should be something lacking from their absence in that place. And that's exactly what happened. The Makom of Beersheva, desert land in the south of Israel, once he left, was not the same, and it had lost its power, its spiritual anchor. It had lost its luster as soon as Yaakov had left and had departed from it. But he had to run because he had a twin brother who was an absolute meshugana, Esav. And Esav wanted to kill him for what he believed stealing his brachot from last week, taking the blessings that his father Yitzchak had bestowed as far as Esav had established in his mind unfairly and incorrectly. And so Yaakov leaves to escape his brother Esav, but as well as that, he needs to get married. And he goes to the same place that his father did as well. And he leaves to go to Haran, where a wife had been found for his Abba, in order to find his wives. Yetze means to go out, because this going out of Yaakov is going to be considered the most important going out of any Jew in history. Because it's going to represent every single galut, every exile from the land of Israel that Jacob's descendants are going to go through. And we're going to see some very more important and very specific information about Yaakov being Mr. Exile. More than all the other Avot, he's going to represent the patriarch. He's going to represent for all Jewish people throughout history the exiles that we're going to go through. And we're going to see 4 that are hinted at in this parasha. 4 exiles that the Jewish people are going to have to endure. And this was revealed to Yaakov for a few reasons. Reason number one, which is the most obvious, is that it's only Yaakov's descendants that are going to go into exile. Remember, Abraham's descendants included Isaac, Yitzchak, as well as Ishmael. And Ishmael's descendants, and Yitzchak's descendants are going to include Yaakov, and they're going to include Esau as well. Yaakov, as we said and mentioned in the past, is the only one of the forefathers who is going to represent the entire Jewish people. Yaakov becomes Yisrael. His name is going to be changed. And that's because his Mitai Shalem, that means all of his descendants are going to become the future Jewish people via the tribes of his sons. And so Yaakov is going to represent every experience that his children are going to have. Masa Avot Simul Banim, the actions of the forefathers are going to represent what happens to their descendants. That's us, the Jewish people. And we're still reliving this prophecy which Yaakov is about to receive by this exiting of the Holy Land of Israel. So we mentioned that Abraham was all about chesed, doing kindness. Remember, he's the one who chased and ran around to bring guests into his home. And we said that Yitzchak was all about gevura, strength, and inner strength and power. No one that went out to announce everything to the entire world. He was more inwardly focused. But Yaakov, my friends, becomes Tiferet. Tiferet is reconciliation, a harmony, a synthesis. If Abraham, we said, is the thesis, Yitzchak is the antithesis, and Yaakov is the synthesis, the coming together of his grandfather and father. He is going to triangulate, right, this vision of the Jewish people, and they all come through him. So he is the one who's going to represent exile Galut, because he himself is being exiled from the land of Israel. And before he leaves, and before he has to deal with Galut, the exile, and he knew full well he'd be dealing with his uncle Lavan, who was a trickster par excellence. And he knew he'd be dealing with trying to find a wife and having to determine who the right wife, or in his case, wives, were going to be. And he's going to deal with a lot of challenges. He's going to be involved in business. He's not sitting there learning the rest of his life. He's going to be involved as a man of the field, because really Esau, his twin brother, was meant to do that, but his twin brother gave up on that. So his brother did what he was doing, and now Yaakov is now doing the role of two sides, like a yin-yang experience. A little bit of Esav inside his Yaakov, and there's a little bit of Yaakov inside his Esav. He's having to marry together, literally in a moment, marry together all the struggles that come with trying to be spiritual in the field of business, work, ethical and moral behavior. And this is extremely difficult. And we see the challenge he's going to have by doing that. But let's remember something which is skipped over so often. Before Yaakov makes his way into Galut, he realizes he needs to prepare himself spiritually. And he does this by going to yeshiva. He goes back to the yeshiva of Shem and Eva. And at this point, Shem was dead, but his son Eva was alive. And he studies there for 14 years, day and night. And we learn something very important as every Rosh Yeshiva will tell their students when they come to this parasha. But it's a very important idea. And even if it's not us for 14 years, it could be us for 2 years, 1 year, 6 evenings, 1 hour a week. But there must be spiritual preparation before we take on the tides and the tribulations of this world. You can't just jump out into the world. This is the idea that before we take on the world outside us, the world which has great potential for spirituality to be lifted up from inside it, you can't do that without some spiritual preparation. And that is what Yaakov has to do. He has to go and sit in the yeshiva of Ever and be mechin, and to prepare himself for that eventuality. How does he prepare himself for Galut? Torah learning. Torah learning. And that is how we prepare ourselves as well. Before we go out into the world, we spend some time. And I always say, no matter how old you are, where you are. You need to at least spend a little bit of it. You've got to taste the idea of a full-time Jewish education. If you didn't have the merit of learning in the yeshiva or Jewish day school, and God willing your kids will have it, at least you can taste it for a little bit, for a month, right? At least a week, just to get a feeling of what the idea of being immersed in a full-time Torah environment. Yaakov taught us this, and we don't discard it. And so he goes, but as soon as he leaves Eretz Yisrael, the Torah tells us, V'yifka b'makom, he encountered a place. Now, V'yifka means he just kind of like bumped into a place. The Torah does not tell us over here what that place is. However, the word makom should ring a bell because we know that Abraham saw a place from afar. And the word makom, which means place, which is also, by the way, a code name for Hashem. The Ramban tells us that God is called place because he represents every place while not being held captive inside it. And so the makom here is actually the future site of the temple. Temple Mount in the heart of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim. There's a midrash, very fascinating one, that says actually he made his way to Haran, reached Haran, realized that he had actually skipped over the place where his grandfather had brought his father as a potential sacrifice, which was a very holy place because of that act. And he realized this, and then he started to make his way to go back. While on his way back to make his way back to Mount Moriah, right, to the future Temple Mount, God did a miracle when he reached a place called Bet El and relocated the mountain to him. It wasn't Yaakov going to the mountain, it was the mountain going to Yaakov. That story may sound familiar from a different religion, but it's based upon a midrash in Judaism. Make no mistake. And so Yaakov has made his way into exile, and he arrives on this mountain, and God does a miracle, and he sets the sun down early, and he goes to sleep. Now, we're told he goes to sleep because it's the first time that he has slept, they say, in 14 years. That may not be literal. It means he never really had a full night's sleep in all the years he was studying in the yeshiva of Ever, ready for this journey. And so he still wanted to prepare himself for this reality. And as soon as he gets there, Hashem, God did a miracle, lets the sun go down early, and he prepares the earth below him, doesn't have a sleeping bag, with rocks. And he surrounds his head with 12 rocks. These 12 rocks, the Midrash tells us, started to get upset. Each one of them wanted to be the pillow that Yaakov rested his head upon. And so they melded into one and became one rock. Now, when you're a kid, this is a nice, cute story about rocks. I'll mention as a side point, the Maharal tells us, whenever you see in Midrash or in the Torah, inanimate objects talking, which you see quite a lot, there's two possibilities. One possibility is that if the rocks could talk, this is what they would say. If the trees could talk, this is what, if a mountain could talk, this is what it could say. Another possibility, says the Maharal, is that each animate and inanimate object has a spiritual angel, a power that keeps it going. The Gemara tells us that a blade of grass does not grow without an angel pushing it with its finger. And so this really is a certain angel of the rocks that is, as it were, conversing with Yaakov at this point. And the idea behind it is that there are 12 stones which represent the 12 tribes that are going to come from Yaakov, and they all come together as one to give protection to Yaakov, right? That's the one stone that he rests his head upon. So Yaakov is going to represent unity as well. He's going to represent the unity of the Jewish people. Fine. So he falls asleep. And this obviously isn't a regular sleep. The fact we're told he goes to sleep, we're not usually told people to go to sleep in the Torah. If the Torah tells us, there's obviously something pretty important happening with this dream. And he does, via Chalom, he has a dream. There are going to be 10 dreams that appear in the Torah. This is probably the most important dream of them all. Each one of them, without each one of them, we would not be the Jewish people today. His dream is probably world famous. V'hinei sulam mutzav arza. In his dream, he sees a ladder. And the ladder is on the earth. However, the Rosho, the top of the ladder, Magia Hashemayma, is going up, Hashemayma, right? We're in verse 12 if you're following, goes up to the heavens. And what does he see on this ladder? Jacob's ladder has come to be called. V'nei malachim, Elokim olim v'yordim ba. There are angels of God that are ascending and descending on this ladder. He sees angels going up and he sees angels going down. Okay? And on top of the ladder is God. We'll talk about that in a minute. What is this ladder? What does it represent? And what are these angels doing? Why are they there? And why are they appearing to Yaakov at this point? These angels are so important because they're going to tell Yaakov a message that is going to be important to him and all of his descendants right to the end of days. Actually, I have an entire chapter on this ladder of Jacob and these angels in my book, The Future on Mashiach. So we're going to see why that is so important. First question, though, is let's investigate a very famous Rashi and try to understand it. And Rashi actually points out that this is rather weird. Why does it say the angels were ascending and descending? Why does it say Olim v'Yodim, going up and going down? Well, what should it say? Shouldn't it be telling us that the angels were going down and going up? That would be the more obvious direction of angels. Where are the angels? They're in heaven. Where is Yaakov? He's on earth. Right? So there's a ladder connecting the two. Okay, I'll buy into the ladder, but why are the angels up there going down and not the other way round? Rashi gives an answer, which is a very, very famous answer, and he says, and others agree with this, and he says that the angels which Yaakov saw in this dream were actually protective angels. They were angels that were with him. They were angels that were accompanying him on his journey l'chutz la'aretz, the outside of Israel. And therefore, they had to leave him. Because, says Rashi, there are different angels inside of Israel and outside of Israel. And since he's about to leave the land of Israel, the angels had to leave him. These are Israeli ones. And therefore, they were going up. They were the ones that were going up. And then you see ones coming down. Those are changing of the guard. And so the angels that were coming down were the outside of Israel angels. They represent, I don't know, France, Russia, Germany, and all the rest of it. So they're the ones who came down to him as he's about to leave. I mean, that alone is fascinating, that we, mere mortals, can be protected by angels. And angels work for us. We don't work for them. We're not so impressed by angels. Right? I know other religions, angels are seen as the best beings, but for us, angels are just messengers of God. They just get the job done. They have a tafkid, they have a job, a mission, and they just make it happen. There's only one question that we have on this Rashi, and that is the following. If that's true, and it is true, because Rashi's told us it is, and it comes to the Gemara as well in the Midrash, he's not leaving Israel yet. He's in Jerusalem, the heart of Jerusalem. Why are the angels leaving him now? Why wouldn't they not wait, these Israeli angels, till he gets to the border of Israel and transfers himself from Aretz, l'chutz la'aretz? Why are they leaving him now? That is a very famous question of the Maharal of Prague on this piece of Torah. And he says something absolutely fascinating, something which I think will resonate with all of us, especially today. And he says that the angels left him because wherever you're going, that's where you are. I say that again. The angels left Yaakov at this point. The Israeli angels who couldn't accompany him outside of Israel, they left him at this point. Because we know, says the Maharal, that wherever you're destined, wherever you're going to, that destination that you've located as your end place, once you make the decision to go there, that's where you are right now. You've taken that first step forward. You're not even there. He wasn't even by the border of Israel. And he was like, we're going. You're now destined to leave. Even though you're here, you're there right now. It's the same thing for us. We have great desires to be in very spiritual places. And in our minds, we're thinking it's a sum or game, right? When I get there, I'll be able to enjoy these spiritual benefits, right? But until I'm there, I'm nothing. But that's not what we learn from Yaakov. We learn from Yaakov and his angels who are with him and leaving him, without him and coming to him, the following idea that if your mind is in a certain place, you have a destination, and that destination may take you a day, a month, a year, 10 years to get to. If that's where you want to be, that's where you are right now. It is seen in the spiritual world as though you are at the location. At this rate, you may not feel it. It may not appear to you that way because you're still stuck wherever you are. But if that's your vision, that's your present location. It's interesting. We actually even learn an interesting halacha from this idea that we say the words Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed very loudly on Yom Kippur. Why? Because we become like angels. And the angels say those words loudly, right? After we say the word Shema, we say, now usually we whisper those words because they're angelic expression. They're angelic expression. And therefore, we shouldn't be saying those words loudly because only the angels. However, in Yom Kippur, when we become like angels, once a year, we have the ability to say those words loudly. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, because we become like angels. We're not eating, we're not drinking like angels, right? We're up, we're praying all day. And so Yom Kippur, the same question. So when Yom Kippur begins, we say the words Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed loudly. It only just began. I didn't even do repentance yet. It's Mariv of Yom Kippur. Wait to the end of Yom Kippur, and I'll say the words loudly then. Then I've really had 25 hours Yom Kippur. I'm like an angel. And yet we don't. We say at the beginning, why? Same concept. Wherever you're going, that's where you are. Yom Kippur has just begun. You've been eating the entire day of Erev Yom Kippur. Your stomach is full. You walk into synagogue, and you still get to say those words loudly like the angels, although you're not very angelic at this point. Because it's the end of Yom Kippur in your mind. Your vision is the end of Yom Kippur, or you're at the beginning. It's as though you're there. Wherever you're going, that's where you are. Now let's talk about these angels and what they were actually there. Let me pull my book out. Cheap plug. Let's have a look at exactly what Yaakov was being told by these angels. Because these angels, says the Gemara Midrash, were actually sending us and Yaakov a very important secret message. Because on Yaakov's ladder, my friends, there were 4 angels. 4 angels. And these 4 angels, say the rabbis in the Midrash, represent the 4 exiles the Jewish people were going to go through. The 4 exiles that Yaakov's descendants were going to have to trouble themselves with. And the 4 exiles are the Babylonian exile, Bavel, and the Persian and Median exile, Paras or Madai, and the Greek exile, Yavan, and the Roman exile, Romi or Edom. It's referred to in those different ways. Actually, the 4 Hebrew words, Bavel, Madai, Yavan, and Romi, have the same numerical value as the words Olim v'Yordim, which are 428. So the gematria of these 4 exiles are actually seen in the Olim v'Yordim. And Yaakov saw each angel climb the number of rungs corresponding to the years of its dominion, and then he saw them descending as if to tell us they're going to go up for this long, but they're going to come down. So Babylon's angel went up 70 rungs and then came down. Remember the 70 years of that exile. The Median angel climbed 52 rungs and then descended. The Greek angel climbed 130 rungs and then it descended as well. Finally, the final angel of Edom went up and up and up and up. And it just kept going. Hundreds and thousands of rungs. And Yaakov became extremely despondent. He started to complain and saying to Hashem, God, what are you doing over here? My descendants are going to go through 4 exiles, but this last 4th exile is going on and on and on, and it's not coming to an end. And God had to reassure Yaakov at that point that the exile wasn't for no reason and wasn't for no purpose. And even that exile, although the longest exile, it's been going on for 2,000 plus years, would eventually come to an end. And the question we need to understand is, Yaakov is going to represent exile, as we said. And that's why his revelation came at nighttime. And he's the third of the three patriarchs. We said that Abraham represents morning, right? The morning time when you're up and ready to go. And it tells us, V'yashkam Abraham baboker, Abraham woke up early in the morning. And we know that Yitzchak represents the afternoon, time of hard work. He's Gevurah, he's strength. And his vision and his prayer is Mincha, right? The time you take out in order to pray to God during the challenge of the daytime. So that's Yitzchak. Yitzchak represents Gevurah, strength in the middle of the day. And that's why he went out to pray and created the afternoon prayer. But Yaakov is going to represent nighttime. Nighttime is darkness, and darkness is exile, where God's presence is not felt strongly like in the morning or afternoon, where you have to dig deeper. You've got to shine lights on places in order to see God in those locations. So Yaakov represents the darkness, the Erev. Erev is from the word which means nighttime. It's from the word mu'urav, which means mixed up. Because when things are dark, they're mixed up. We don't know what's happening. That's us in Galut. Here we are in exile. The fourth exile, maybe the fifth one, another discussion. But the fourth exile of Yaakov Avinu. And now we're seeing the angel is yet to come down. And we're in darkness. We're in the world of Yaakov. And God said to him and says to us, your time is coming. Don't worry, the redemption will be with you and you will return, which we see happen to Yaakov. He's going to leave, get married, sire children, and then return to the land of Israel. That mirrors our return to the land of Israel at the end of days, at the end of Galut. What is the purpose of Galut anyway? Why is God doing this to Yaakov? So Galut comes for a few reasons. Reason number one, we see in the Musaf of the Chagim, right? Because of our sins. We sin. We sin. And God says the land of Israel is very, very kadosh. However, if you mess up the land of Israel, as we see in Parsha Kadoshim, the eretz is Yokiad Yoshvea. It vomits out its inhabitants. That is one of the natures of the land of Israel. The land of Israel doesn't tolerate sin like other countries do, like other lands do. It is kadosh land. And Rashi tells us over there that just like a bad food goes into the stomach and gets rejected and ejected, vomited out, so too the land of Israel vomits out inhabitants, Jew or otherwise, that misbehave in the land, has a low tolerance rate. And that is the power of the land of Israel. So that's one reason we sin, and we don't always merit the land of Israel. But number two goes deeper, and that's because God allows converts to be in this world. And how are we going to attract converts, says the Gemara? Well, there's only one way. You got to go get them. We saw that from Avinu, and we're going to see it from Yaakov as well. And we're going to have to go out to the foreign nations in order to pick up those holy sparks. And the whole reason we have Galut is in order to go out and pick up the souls of those individuals who are found in foreign places as members of foreign nations, and to bring them back as converts to our people. We're going to see a lot of this, say Chazal, right before Mashiach comes. There's going to be a wave of atheism that's going to fill the world, but also we're going to see a lot of converts who are going to be attracted and are going to be joining our people right at the end of days. Where these souls come from is a different, fascinating discussion. And according to, this is more Kabbalah, the Sfas Emes talks about this, but others too, these are actually the original souls that Abraham and Sarah tried to convert in their day. They came back and were out to join our people. And they made their way to Mount Sinai, but they couldn't actually be there because they weren't Jewish, but they were members of other nations who actually wanted to receive the Torah at that time, but they weren't permitted to because they were part of nations that said no. So God allowed these souls to reincarnate into future generations and be dispersed around the world in different times of history. And we go to Galut in order to go and pick up these holy sparks and make them part of the Jewish people. That could well be the secret of where converts come from. And I've had many, many great friends and teachers and rabbis who are converts. And if you ever ask a convert, which you should do, and say, what motivated you to convert? I'll give you some stories, but I've never had a good explanation, right? It's never a rational thing. It's a soul thing. And they'll say to you, I always felt Jewish. They always say that. Ever since I was a young child, I knew in my heart of hearts I was different, and I knew that this is a path I had to be. And once I heard one convert once say that he was watching television on Erev Pesach, and they came up with a message, at Easter time, we like to wish our Christian viewers happy Easter, and our Jewish viewers a happy Passover. And he said that when they said happy Passover, it's like, and he grew up in the outskirts of Washington, right? It was like there wasn't a Jew anywhere. And he said that he knew that he had to become Jewish, right? So it's rarely a rational thing, it's an emotional, and it's a soul-based thing. That's one of the reasons for Galut, which we're learning here as well. Okay, not long to go, so I just want to finish off with the various wives that Yaakov is going to marry. And probably one of the famous stories that we see in the Torah, where we actually learn out laws and customs from, is the marriage of Yaakov to Rachel and Leah. Now, the original plan, Chazal tell us, was not that Yaakov should marry two sisters. Okay? Number one, that's forbidden in the Torah. Now, the Torah hasn't been given yet. However, if you're following, we're on chapter 29, verse 9. And so Yaakov is now going to marry his Beshet, his destined, who was Rachel. However, he ends up marrying two sisters. According to many people, actually, according to some rather, they're actually twins, just like Yaakov and Esau. And it was meant to be Esau marrying Leah, an older brother for the older sister, and then Yaakov and Rachel. But remember that Esau removed himself from the family, did not want to be part of the spiritual heritage and future of his family. So it ends up Yaakov is stuck. And he's stuck with two sisters. Since the Torah had not been given yet, this was not forbidden. However, we're going to see that Yaakov is not going to end up being buried for a number of reasons. But one of them is this, with both of these wives, with Rachel and Leah, because in the future the Torah would be given. It would say you're not allowed to marry sisters, which you're not allowed to do, when one sister is alive. And it would look embarrassing. People go to visit Yaakov's kever, his burial place, in Mar Machpelah in Hebron, right, in Kiryat Arba, and they walk in, they're like, wow, Yaakov's the two sisters? That's against the Torah. And so God spared him that embarrassment, and he made Rachel die on the path, on the road, in Bethlehem, that's Kever Rachel, and it was Leah who ends up being buried with Yaakov in Mar Machpelah. Okay, I just want to pick out one, it's a famous story, but one part of the story between Yaakov and I consider this to be one of the great ideas about love, okay? Because we know that Yaakov meets Rachel in a very similar place by the water, and Lavan hears about this. Lavan, who's Rivka's brother, his uncle, and so he's going to go now and deal with Lavan trying to marry this woman, Rachel. And Yaakov loves Rachel, and Lavan didn't want to give her up without getting some financial benefit from his future son-in-law. Nowadays we made it wrong. Now it's like son-in-laws trying to get financial benefit out of the father-in-laws. It's going to be the other way around. Okay? And he says, I'm going to work for 7 years. Okay? For Rachel. But he says, don't try to trick me. Don't give me the wrong. And he tries everything. However, he can't help being deceived, because in the end, it's Rachel who ends up deceiving him. And Yaakov gives a special sign to Rachel that she should produce on the night of their marriage, that she is actually Rachel, and the switcheroo between Yaakov, of Lavan, between Rachel and Leah did not happen. But Rachel felt terrible for her sister, her older sister, who we're told was devastated that she was still single. And so Rachel allowed Leah to have the secret signs. Okay? What these signs are, we're not told. There's a tradition which I heard that it was a song of some sort, right? And Yaakov had been deceived by Rachel. By the way, you'll notice that Yaakov deceived in order to get the brachot, which was a correct deception. However, for the rest of his life, he's going to be deceived by Laban hundreds of times and Rachel. So he's going to go, what goes around comes around, even though they were the right decisions. So he's going to have to deal with that. So have you ever seen at a wedding, like, la, 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 la? So I heard that actually that's Leah, 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 Leah. You're marrying Leah, right? Whoever it was present at the wedding, maybe the angels themselves were actually warning Yaakov that Leah, 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 Leah is who you're actually marrying. However, that's not what God wanted. God wanted him to actually marry Leah and then eventually Rachel. What's fascinating over here, let me find the verse, is in verse 20. This is what I heard from someone. It was very, very difficult for him, right? 7 years. He wanted to marry. He found his b'shet, his zivug. People wait months, right, or a year to marry there, and it's very difficult. He had to wait 7 years working for this unscrupulous father-in-law of his. And it says, V'yavod Yaakov barachel shebashanim. And Yaakov worked to marry Rachel for 7 years. Ve'yu be'enav. However, it seemed in his eyes, keyamim achadim, as very few days, ba'avato, because he loved her. He loved her. And so he worked for 7 years, but it seemed in his eyes as they were very, very short. The time went very, very quickly. So one of my teachers pointed out something fascinating. It says, kayimim achadim, which we translate as, it seemed like a few days. 7 years, because he loved her so much. The work he put into this marrying her, right? Desire to marry her was so strong, and he loved her so much that it didn't seem like 7 years. It went very, very quickly. But the way you say a short amount of time is not yamim achadim, it's yamim mu'atim. Mu'atim, ma'at. There weren't many days. It doesn't say that. It says they seemed to him like yamim achadim. Why would it say achadim and not yamim mu'atim or lo harbeh, or some other way of saying it went quickly? It went quickly for him. It wasn't as difficult as you think it was. And he pointed out the word achadim comes from the word echad, which means one. And the rabbis tell us, I think I heard this actually from Abraham Twersky, when I went to a drug retreat as a rabbi a number of years ago. I went a bunch of times actually for this organization as a drug counselor early in my career, even when I was single actually. And he says you learn from this that if you have a very difficult challenge in life, no matter how difficult it is, you should always take it one day at a time. He didn't think 7 years. You can't think that. You're going to go crazy, right? You can't even think 1 year ahead. What he was able to do, because of his focused energy, was I'm going to take one day at a time, right? Which you may recognize, one of the slogans that drug addicts use as part of their recovery process. I'm going to take one day at a time. I can't think of drugs, right? No drugs for a year, definitely not a lifetime, or for a month, but I can think about it today. Today, I'm not going to pick up that drug. And this is actually the technique which Yaakov introduces in the Torah. How am I going to get through this time? How am I going to survive this? I can't think 7 years. I'm going to take this challenge, this dealing with Lavan, waiting for Rachel, and then waiting for her again, one day at a time. Yamim achadim. And it worked. It actually worked. This mountain, by the way, I want to mention to you, which I should have mentioned before, I apologize, is referred to in the Torah as Shar Hashemayim, the gateway to heaven. And it's not a coincidence that Yaakov was the one who ended up, that's the name it's referred to, because when he woke up, he freaked out. He's like, wow, I just thought this was a mountain where something amazing happened. I didn't realize that this was actually the gateway to heaven. What does that mean, the gateway to heaven? And the rabbis tell us that every single tefillah, every prayer of every individual throughout world history, definitely from this point on, passes through that makom, passes through that place. Mount Moriah is the gateway to heaven because every single prayer that is made passes through and goes up, if you will, in Jacob's ladder, up to Shemayim, up to the heavens. Actually, one tradition is that angels are the ones that take our prayers to Shemayim, to heaven in the first place, right? Which some prayers are in Hebrew and some in Aramaic. So they are the transporters are tefillot. No matter where you pray, it's Shara Shemayim, the future place of the temple, first and second, and God willing, the third temple too, when it gets reestablished at times of Mashiach, right? Which Yaakov is being hinted. Actually, Yaakov was one of the few people in history who actually knew the final date of the arrival of the Messiah. And that is what Yaakov is going to do. And he's going to have children. Before he returns, he's going to make full use of his time in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, and he's going to build up family. Once he has his children and he brings Yosef into being, he realizes that he has the spiritual fortitude to make his way back to the land of Israel, which he is going to be doing in the next parasha. Okay, friends.